Hello, everyone, and welcome to the next edition of our Spiritist Learning Series. It is a pleasure to be here with you today, and we are very glad that you made it. Today, we have a special guest to be with us. Suzana Simões was born in Brazil and has been living in the United States for the past 31 years. She was born in a Spiritist family, and she's one of the founders of the Conscious Living Spiritist group. She dedicates her time between her family, her work as a doctor of physical therapy, and as a director of rehabilitation, as well as spending time disseminating Spiritism in English and in Portuguese. We're going to bring her on camera for a little bit, and we're very excited that you have joined us. And our idea is simple. We have simple conversations with people we really admire and want to listen so that we may reflect over time on the lessons that Spiritism brings us. But before we begin, we also want to make sure that we do a little prayer, as is our custom. We do a little bit of a harmonization beforehand with a prayer. So our friend Anísio over here will be bringing us a quick prayer.
So much need in our planet Earth. May compassion guide our way, and may our spirituality become stronger and stronger as we connect with the divine. Thank you very much, and we ask permission to open our work this morning in San Diego. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anísio. We are really glad that you are here with us today as well. And so as we get ready to do this, let's bring our friend Suzana to the picture. Hi, Suzana. How are you doing?
Hey, Daniel. Hello, everybody. I'm doing good. Thank you for having me here today.
Wonderful. So, Suzana, I'm going to bring your PowerPoint to the picture, and then we're going to just hear you. So thank you so very much for
Okay, Daniel.
today.
All right. Thank you, everybody. So, our topic for our reflection today, your enemies. Who are they? Just as a reference for our reflection this morning, we have the Gospel According to Spiritism and the Spiritist book, but also we are seeking to reread those books with a new insight, a new vision, which comes from all the work and all the knowledge that we have nowadays from the psychological series of Joanna de Angelis. That really helps us to kind of read Kardec with a new light, a little bit more of a sophisticated light, if you will. So hopefully you see how those two merge really well when we think about the issue of having enemies. This lecture is the very last lecture of a series of lectures that I have done. They're all available on YouTube. At the YouTube for Conscious Living Spiritist Group, which is CLSG videos. And the lectures prior to this one, they address some key concepts that will help us to actually think today's topic. So I want to go briefly over them. One of them is the idea of God, really kind of bringing us to think about God and feel God in a very different way. Although we do know that God is the supreme intelligence of the universe, we continue to relate to God in a very personal way. We talk to God, we bargain with God, we negotiate with God, we ask God for things as if there's a person out there listening to us on the other side of the phone. So the idea here is that God is not something that we seek outside, but it's something that is in us. It's part of us, is an energy, is an awareness, is something bigger that is part of who we are. Another idea important, I'm going to skip selfishness, is the idea of good and evil, which you find on Genesis. And there we learn that evil does not exist. So if you think of a tree and the sun and the shade of the tree, um, there's no point in trying to eliminate the shade, because the shade is not real. The shade is there because the tree is blocking the sun. So when we think about our betterment and transformation, it really makes no sense to be attacking what we call the evil, because the evil is simply the presence of something that is blocking the light. So what we need to target is, what is this blocking piece? And the blocking piece, according to the spirits, is selfishness. So selfishness is at the root of all the problems that we have, all our vices and troubles and what we call evil. At the very root, at the very base of it, is selfishness. So this is an idea that we have to work in our minds. And for anything and everything that we are undergoing, always ask ourselves, where is selfishness? We can also ask ourselves, where is God? Plurality of consciousness, which is another way of thinking of plurality of worlds, talks about where we are in our evolution. This is very, very important because if we don't really know, if we don't really come to terms with the fact that we are, for instance, spirits who are still dominated by evil, in the sense that everything that we do and the way that we act, that we think, that we feel is extremely self-centered. And self-centeredness is still a very primitive way of being and relating. So this awareness helps us to know our place in the universe, know our place in relationships. And actually is the most powerful effect of this awareness is humbleness. We're going to talk about self-discovery as being, as we all know, like the key for taming our evil tendencies, as well as progressing. The spirits have told us the importance of knowing ourselves, and this being the key element for personal growth. We're going to talk about passions. Next slide, I'm going to go a little bit into it. And also, I want to talk about transformation versus taming of evil tendencies, because a lot of times we confuse those two. We tame our tendencies and we change our behavior, and we equate that to transformation, which is really not the same. Very different things. One is just the change in the behavior. The other one is the change on the impulse, on the desire, on the passion within that leads to the behavior. So those are important keys to the understanding of what we're going to talk about today, and I will refer back to them as needed. But let me take a minute here to look at the issue of passions. So passions, according to Genesis, have a providential utility in our lives. And according to question 908, they're like a horse that is useful when controlled, but dangerous when it does the controlling. And then there's a comment by Kardec that says that passions are levers that increase human power tenfold and help them fulfilling God's providence. All passions have their principle in a sentiment or need of nature. So this is an important concept for us to understand, because passions are divine in nature. The problem is when they get out of hand or they are misdirected, and then they will create a number of problems. And since passion is a natural feeling and is a divine feeling in itself that helps us to fulfill a divine purpose, there's a difference in between taming and killing our passions, which I will get to in another few minutes. Okay, so today our topic is love the enemies. And so our evil, right? We know that evil does not exist, but we're going to, for didactic purposes, call the evil that we're going to address today is vengeance. So vengeance is a noun that means the act or desire for revenge, a punishment inflicted in retaliation for an injury or offense retributive punishment. Some synonyms are payback, reprisal, retaliation, and you can use defy or set as an act of vengeance. Okay, so since transformation comes through self-knowledge, to the knowledge of the truth, this is a question of 115 of the Spirit's book that talks about that our evolution, the process of enlightenment, does not come from doing good things. They can have a role, but that's not the key component. The key component is the knowledge of the truth, our inner truth. Who are we and where are we in our evolutionary process? Okay, so with that idea, that this is the topic for today and what we're going to be working on. So we're going to look at how the idea of passions and self-discovery, they go together to work on this topic. Remembering that when we're talking about self-discovery, there will be always two steps. The first one is awareness. And once you're aware of what is, then you can analyze what is. And then after awareness and analysis, we're going to do an applicability. How does this whole concept really fits in our day-to-day life? So first question, if we go back here, right? So the first step here is awareness. And we are talking about loving your enemies. And we are talking about forgiveness. So maybe if you don't have enemies, this entire chapter in the Gospel according to Spiritism was not written to you. But we suspect that it was written to all of us because of our nature, of our level of evolution, of what characterizes our spiritual moment. So we're going to go into the Gospel to try to help us to gain awareness of having or not having enemies and identifying who are our enemies. So in chapter 12, which is Love Your Enemies, in item 3, the Spirits will tell Kardec a little bit about what loving the enemy means. And I think when we read this passage very carefully, we will be able to identify that, hey, perhaps I do have a few enemies here and there. And it was written to you. It was written to me. It was written to all of us. So it's really important when we're reading the Gospel that no matter what is it that we're reading, we ask ourselves, how does this text fits my life, my reality, who I am and where I am in my evolution? So if you look at the text, it says to love one enemy means holding neither hatred, rancor, nor desires for vengeance against them. It means forgiving them unconditionally and without ulterior motives for the evil they cause us. So let's stop here just for one moment and think about holding. So do you think, and it's for you to think, it's for you to feel, it's for you to answer, that in your heart, there is a little bit of holding of anything that is different than love, right? So when we think about enemies, maybe we might say, this does not fit to me because I'm not really someone inclined to go out there. There's no one there I can identify that today I would like to kill, for example. Okay, so maybe that is a very extreme way of thinking it. But the Gospel will introduce us a much more subtle way of thinking about our enemies. So rancor, right? Desires of vengeance. And here he's talking about ulterior motives. Those are hidden motives. Now, a little bit that we know about psychology, without being psychologists, we know that the consciousness is a little cork floating in the ocean. And the entire ocean is our unconscious, all the things in our psychic that we don't see. So perhaps whatever we can see, as far as we can see, we may say, no, I don't have anything, really. Perhaps in your unconscious or subconscious, not so exposed to your eyes, there are some feelings there that would place the other person in a position of an enemy, even if it's just for a moment. And then it talks about for the evil they have causes. It means not setting up any obstacles to reconciliation. It means wanting the good for them instead of wishing evil. It means rejoicing instead of despairing for the good that reaches them, extending a helping hand in case of necessity. abstaining either in word or in act from anything that might harm them. Finally means repaying their evil with good and everything with no intention of humiliating. So again, look at those things, and this is an exercise. When you go home, do this today, right? Um, do we in any way set up an obstacle for reconciliation? So maybe you may say, I forgive that person. I just don't want to see them ever again in my life, right? Um, or sometimes you say, yeah, I don't have anything against them, but you will call, you might cancel someone from your life entirely, right? You might say, yeah, I mean, everything is good, but they need to come here and apologize to me in first place. So all those little situations might be a way of looking at the possibility that we have enemies, not enemies in the most traditional way that we like to think, but enemies in a Christian way, right? And sometimes those enemies can be someone that you love, that in a given moment criticizes you, that in a given moment is opposing to your view, and by doing so is not necessarily feeding your ego, nurturing your ego, putting you in a, in a higher place, and therefore you feel that discomfort, you feel that tightness, you feel a light irritation, because the spiritists do not feel anger, they feel irritated, frustrated with the person. And all those feelings and all those situations will characterize, from the gospel perspective, that person as your enemy. Let's put back the text, and so we can look again, seek for a few more tips on things that we can think about. Here, when it talks about abstaining either in word or in act. So yeah, I don't have enemies, but I also don't miss an opportunity to talk bad about people when I can. And when people are talking bad about someone, I might join in and be aware of the pleasure that I have, how good for the ego it is to talk bad about someone. And sometimes that is your vengeance right there. That is your revenge. To words, by diminishing, by making ridicule of someone in front of others, by pointing out their shortcomings. This, my dear friends, if we read the gospel, is vengeance. And that person is taking the place of your enemy. So moving on with here, um, specifically an item that talks about vengeance. Even if they not seek outright revenge, they nevertheless harbor rancor and a secret desire of evil. Now, look, secret desire. Sometimes it's because religion tells us that this is a bad thing. We will disguise for our own selves. We will deny our own desires for vengeance. In fact, those who indulge in this deadly and blind passion almost never seek revenge openly. Look at that. So you may not go out there and scream and hit and do this or that, but a lot of times we do secretly and quietly. However, more often than not, they put on a hypocritical appearance, hiding in the depths of their hearts the evil sentiment that animates them. When their hatred does not reach such extremes, they attack their enemies' honors and affections. They do not recoil at slander, and their perfidious insinuations, skillfully sewn under the four, I cannot read that, and larger along the way. Oh, there it is. Thank you, Daniel. Sewn under the four wings, grow larger along the way. So cowards, this comes a little further down in the chapter, who avenge themselves like these 100 times, guiltier than those who go straight to the enemies and insult them in the face, right? So it's disturbing, because a lot of times the ones who are being openly aggressive are readily judged. But what the gospel is telling us is that A lot of times we are doing all those things quietly, in a hidden way. And according to the gospel, this is a lot more problematic than the ones who are openly attacking their enemies. All right. So who are your enemies, right? So maybe we gone over the first step here where we have identified that love and rancor can coexist. So you actually have enemies in your families, in your friends, among your friends, and it can be for a moment or for many moments, right? But now that we identify, we can start now taking the path for forgiveness. And forgiveness in this case is not going to be necessarily a order that comes from God. We're not going to forgive because we have been told that we have to forgive, because that mostly create hypocritical individuals who put masks on and start behaving in certain ways without truly transforming themselves. But we're going to go to the path of forgiveness because now we have an understanding of the philosophical concepts that we're going to put together in such a way that's going to naturally lend us to forgiveness. Let's see how. So let's say you seek revenge, right? So the next question would be, where is my revenge and how do I seek revenge? But perhaps most importantly, which are the fundamental beliefs that sustain my desire to seek revenge? And then you take your second step, which is to tame your tendencies. So you're going to realize that you have the impulse to seek revenge and you're going to choose not to. So the impulse remains there, but you're able to change the behavior. You want to talk bad about someone, but you tame your tendencies and you say, I am not going to, right? Then the third step is to understand what is the feeling behind revenge, so that then, and what is the passion, so then ultimately we can direct that passion in a way of goodness and service of life as it's supposed to be. So let's see, what is when we're talking about revenge, what is the feeling that drives revenge? So the answer here is the feeling of justice. Someone who is seeking revenge is seeking justice. Justice is the passion. Justice is something that we all have, this sentiment, this impulse that is to be used to serve life and to fulfill the design goals. Now, what happens with this very honorable feeling of justice? Let's get back to the basic elements, to the key elements that we are talking about. The Spirit told us that at the root of all evil, there is selfishness. So the drive for justice is a passion. Now, and the feeling is the desire for justice. So we think of this desire, this impulse, as the horse, as the energy. Now, if you multiply that by selfishness or self-centeredness, right? So now you have the creation of an evil, which is the need for vengeance. So the passion here, the horse, is being poorly directed, and who is directing the passion is the ego. So because the ego is at the center of everything, it will identify the other as the enemy. So if the ego is at the center and the other is the enemy, who is in charge of justice? I am. Now, let's look at betrayal. And I'm going to be talking very briefly about betrayal from like a marriage perspective, but this can really be taught us any level of betrayal between friends, at work, between kids and parents, and so forth. And here is the applicability of everything that we have talked thus far. So when you are dealing with betrayal, right, if you are at the center, if you are ego-centered, then what betrayal will do is it's going to be exposing the failure of the relating, right? So an analysis that is done by the ego will do what? Point fingers, blame, victimize, nurture the idea of unfairness, and feel that because the other one is the one who betrayed, the other one is the one who messed up, he is inferior and I am superior. So the ego immediately puts itself in a higher place. Now, here are some fundamental beliefs in the Spiritist perspective that helps us to see things slightly different. So what is it that Spiritism teaches us? Teaches us the idea of justice that's much higher than you and I. And under this idea of justice, nothing in life is unfair. The challenges and the painful situations that we undergo are warning signs for our spiritual needs. Everything that comes into our life, we are attracting and it's meeting the needs that we have for this particular life. And nothing happens without God's permission. Not even a leaf falls from a tree without God's knowledge and permission. So from this perspective, who is the other? The materialistic perspective, the ego-centered perspective, will identify the other as the enemy. But in the Spiritist perspective, the other is the instrument to my growth. And in my evolution, it's not, he or she is not my enemy. The moment that I can get in touch with all these different perspectives and feel the other to be someone who is my partner in this life, and in addition to that, I add to this equation the awareness that him and I and everybody else is in this planet, which is a hospital and a prison, because we are both sick and rebels. And the moment that you understand your true place in this life, then there is a magic thing that happens within us. The ego shifts out of the center and gives space. Sometimes it's a tiny crack for the God that lives within us to manifest. And that energy emerges and really helps us to navigate life with a very different perspective and much better outcomes. So from a place where we are centered around God and the spiritual values that we talk so much about, we recognize our own inferiority. We recognize that the other one perhaps openly betrayed, but perhaps I do small betrayals on a day to day. The other one failed, but I probably have been failing in different ways in this relationship. So from this perspective, I'm going to look and I'm going to say, all right, this relationship failed. What is it that I did? Maybe you didn't do anything, but that's precisely the problem. Maybe you were too passive. Maybe you were too distracted. So you might ask yourself, what were my mistakes? Was I present enough? Was I nurturing enough? And even if all your answers for that were yes, which usually is not, still whatever you were undergoing is needed and is part of your spiritual needs, and it meets your need for evolution and growth because you too are in a planet that is a planet of trials and expiations. So moving forward, if we think of the marriages, right, you have a few options. You can dissolve the marriage and become enemies. You can dissolve the marriage and remain friends. You can continue to marry and say, you know what, I'm going to accept this other person as he or she is because he needs me. So you remain, but you remain in a vertical position where the ego continues to put you in a higher place. Or you can continue with that marriage with the understanding that we are one another, a tool for our own spiritual growth. That the other fail, but so I fail on a day to day. And so you come together with the willingness to repair and to continue to grow. So it's a moving forward in a much more horizontal way. And then if you're brave enough, you can even ask the other one, can you tell me what is it in my behavior that actually led you to or contribute for your decision to betray? Now, regardless of what happens on the outside, the most important thing in concluding our talk is what happens inside, is the inner choices that we are making. So when we all carry, as I mentioned, God within ourselves. God is this impulse that calls for justice and fairness. Again, an impulse that is not, so when we feel the desire for revenge, and this is very important, the idea is not to kill it, because if you kill the impulse, you're going to become one of these persons who is in the world completely dead and apathic to all the injustices of the world. The issue is not to kill the impulse. The impulse is divine. The impulse serves a higher purpose. The issue is it needs to be guided by the self and not by the ego. So taming the passion is controlling the ego, and make this exercise not to see the other one as an enemy, understanding that the purpose of the incarnation is evolution, and here's where the effort comes in play. The effort is to tame our evil tendencies. Okay, so think about the world that we live in today. Think of the many, many people that make you feel uncomfortable, that bother you for one reason or another. Your ego identified them as the enemy. If you open space, if you move the ego from the center and let God speaks through you, you will see the other one as your brother. You see the other one as an instrument. You see other one, you look at the other person in the eyes, meaning horizontally, understanding that he needs you and you need him. And going back to the slide, so self-knowledge is transformative. So a lot of times we are like in the effort to become better, but the effort is to tame the energy, is to tame our tendencies, our evil tendencies, right? But the transformation comes simply from the awareness. So once you channel your energy and attention to knowing yourself, then the desire for revenge fades away. You get in touch with your real position in the universe. You are no longer seeking revenge because someone told you as a result of an effort to be better. You are not seeking revenge because you are understanding and in touch with the truth of who you are and the position that you occupy. So here's my last slide from the gospel. For believers and especially spiritists, the way of seeing things is different because they consider both the past and the future, between which their present life is only a dot. They know that because of the very destiny of the earth, they must expect to meet up with evil and perverse people, that the weakness of which they are target makes up part of the trials they must undergo, and their elevated point of view renders the vicissitudes less bitter, whether they come from things or other people. If they do not complain about their trials, they must not murmur against those who serve as their instruments. If instead of complaining, they they thank God for putting them to test, they should. Let me see here. Can you make that bigger for me? Thank you. If instead of complaining, they thank God for putting them to test, they should thank the hand that furnished them the opportunity to prove their patience and resignation. This will naturally dispose them to forgiveness. So I want to conclude with that. Naturally disposes them to forgiveness. So they're not seeking to be forgiven. It is the understanding that selfishness is at the root of everything. It is the understanding that evil does not exist. It is the connecting of the dots of all these key elements in the spiritist perspective that allows for justice to take place. Now, justice taking place is us understanding our position. It is us realigning with the God that lives within, so that we no longer harm and we no longer create the need for challenging and difficult situations in our future. So justice takes place primarily, initially, and mainly within each one of us. I hope that these reflections make sense and can help us in a very brief way to rethink, one, recognizing that we have enemies, and two, engaging in the exercise to see each one as a brother and sister, and to integrate the concepts that we so much talk about so that forgiveness becomes a natural outcome in our living. Thank you.
Thank you, Suzana. Can you hear me?
Yep.
All right. Thank you for sharing that with us. And I wonder if we have time for one question. If anybody wants to offer a commentary or a question, you have left us with a lot to meditate and think about. So let me see if anybody courageous here. You can even come up and no, I think people are a little bit shy. But thank you, Suzana. Thank you so very much for bringing attention to this important topic and leading us into an eternal reflection of what role we can play in our own lives. So we really appreciate, and we hope to see you soon in the future.
Sure. Thank you, guys. Have a good one.
Bye-bye.
Bye.